the story mind. It's the one concept that Dramatica has different than any other theory of story. And in fact, not tooting my own horn, but just by way of information, a number of nationally known narrative theorists with PhDs have said that the story mind concept is what makes Dramatica the first new theory of story since Aristotle. And we stumbled across it. We happened to be playing in a fertile field and stumbled across it. It's not anything we came up with that was brilliant. It's that we intentionally, when we created Dramatica, did not read books about what others had done. I still haven't read Poetics, okay, all the way through. I've seen bits and pieces. We did not read Sinfield. We did not read Poetics. We did not read Jung. We did not read The Hero's Journey, The Hero with a Thousand Faces, any of this stuff. None of this, did we read, because we thought that in an area where things didn't seem to be working with traditional knowledge, the more we learned about traditional knowledge, the more blinders we put on, and perhaps that's why people haven't found anything that was more useful, is that they began to think subliminally in terms of what they were told was how things worked. So we withheld that from ourselves in those early days at USC, and instead went on our own hunt for structure. No training in doing such a thing like that, but again, not to compare ourselves to them in the grandeur of what they accomplished, but we went about it in similar ways as Crick and Watson when they came up with DNA. They had an intuitive sense that there was a structure to this thing, and they believed it was some kind of a helix or spiral, but they weren't quite sure what. So they got these really expensive industrial collegiate tinker toys, basically. And they sat around for hours, and way after hours, putting together different forms based on little bits of information they did know about DNA, and trying to come up with something that would explain it and was also elegant. They believed there was an elegance to it. They believed there was an elegance to the structure. And they would try this form and that form, and they put these tinker toys together. It wasn't based on, they had a few X-rays they'd taken of the crystalline form of DNA, which looks like a little crystal. So they knew a couple things about it. And they had a sense it was probably a spiral, but they weren't quite sure. And so they went and built all these with the elements they knew were in DNA, until one day they put something together and they looked at it and they go, oh my God, that does two things. It answers every bit of information that we currently know satisfactorily, and it's also beautiful. And when they did that, they went running off to tell everybody they found the structure of DNA, and they tested it against it, and every time they tested it, it actually worked. Okay, until somebody was finally able to photograph it many years later. They didn't even have technology for that at the time, but it met all and every test they put to it, it continued to function. Well, Dramatica came out the same way. When we put it together, it was when we came up with this storyline concept that we came up with something elegant that explained everything we'd been seeing. We had walls covered in this office. I was locked into this room for like 3 years with white walls that I started filling with Post-it notes on all sides and putting together in different patterns and different information over here, and each wall had a different aspect that I could deal with of what I was trying to work on. And finally, I was looking at it one day, I'm walking up and down, and we started working with psychology of characters, specifically the main character. Chris had a question that he really wanted answered. He said, if there's a main character like Scrooge who's the cause of the problem, why doesn't he see it? Simple question, okay, but the answer is really difficult. Why doesn't he see it? So we started looking into things like rationalization, justification, building up experience that created kind of like a scab on the mind where it filters things out that you don't see them, so you're not acting irrationally. You've just been hurt in a particular area and it's built up, So we had everything from logistic explanations and clinical explanations to very conversational explanations like that one. And we put in more information about psychology. Well, how do you get out of this? What stages do you have to go through, like the 7 stages of grief? What stages do you have to go through to get out of that and to recognize the problem? Chris had a phrase he always loathes having come up with. The moment at which the main character is forced to see his problem and know that others see it as well, so he can no longer keep it to himself. It's called the light of critical self-awareness. Okay? It's like, oh, that sounds so pretty. The light of critical, but it sounds puffy too. And so Chris always is embarrassed by that because he popped in, I know, it's the light of critical self-awareness. I said, what? But anyway, it's kind of cool. So the thing is that what brings somebody to that point? How does that happen? The mechanics of it, the psychology of it. And we began to realize that we started using terms all over this map that we had all over the walls that were all psychological terms to describe this main character and how he related to the story and what things had to happen in the plot and what things had to happen in the theme to bring him to that point. And then one day I was standing around this room, Chris' office, and I'm standing there looking around. I look at it and I say, this is like, it's a whole psychology. Part of it's with the main character, part of it seems to be in the plot, part seems to be in the theme, but the whole thing seems to be one complete psychology. If you put it all together, you've almost got the psychology of Percy, you know? So I went in and I told him that, and he thought about it for a second. As he often does, he gets very pensive, and often he has to lay down and close his eyes because dealing with theory for Chris, he says in order to hold it into his mind, he has to shut off his mind, so he actually gets into kind of this self-induced state. I mean, it's really weird. You know, he'll get down and lie down on the floor in his office, you know, and I'll be standing there looking at Chris, and I'll say, I came up with this inspiration, what do you think? And just a minute. Anyway, and so, you know, you see this REM going on, and finally he says, I think you're right, you know. So anyway, he says, I think you're right, and at that point we started investigating it a little more, and we started reorganizing the material, not to be the psychology of the main character, but to be the psychology of the story as a whole. And as soon as we did that, all the material we had for years of development just fell right into place. It's just right into, you know, we knew what we were building. Now we're building a psychology. We had this elegant model, okay? Then we had to test it, just like Crick and Watson. So we went out and we tried testing it in various areas, and every place we applied it, it worked. It worked. There wasn't a hole, and it still works. I still haven't found anything that doesn't work with it. So Dramatica, to me, is the DNA of story, okay? We had the stupidity to come out and say that at a story conference once. For centuries, people have been looking for the meaning of story and, you know, and looking for the DNA of story, and we are here to announce we have found it. Okay? We never lived that down. We still don't. And to this day, people who are so put off by saying that we've come up with the, you know, explanation for story that they refer to Dramatica as the spawn of Satan on a message board. Makes me feel good, you know. I say, right on. No, no. Anyway, a lot of people say, because you'll get into this later, you see on your little charts, we have universe, physics, mind, and psychology. Okay, the four basic things that are in there. You know, an internal state, universe, an internal state, mind, an external state, universe. State of things outside, state of things inside. Process outside, activities, physics. Process inside psychology. You look at that, but you know what? After we came up with this, somebody told me, you know, you should read Dianetics. They talk about universe, physics, mind, psychology. You go, oh my God, not only we're the spawn of Satan, but we're also into Dianetics. You know, that's what this is. It's derivative. No. No. Interestingly enough, if you look at the bottom of this thing with 64 elements, it's the I Ching. And in fact, if you take an I Ching map with all their little lines and dots and everything, they have the same relationship among them that these things have among themselves in those words. Okay, so it's like, yeah, we're at we cast the I Ching to learn more about Dianetics because we're the spawn of Satan. Okay, this is, you know, so no. The fact is, the human mind is a psychology. The human mind has the same operating system in all of us. The information we get is different, and the dynamics that we create as to how often we frequent part of our minds is based on our experience and our conscious choice. So what we can do with it, the programming we have is all different, but the operating system is exactly the same, okay? It's exactly the same. And as a result of that, anything we create will project our own psychology on it. We will tend to see things in certain patterns. Why do we see a spiral in a teacup and a spiral in a galaxy? You know, there's no relationship between the galaxy and the teacup other than we see a spiral in each, okay? And that's us projecting, like looking at an ink blot, the best meaning we can find for the data that we're receiving. But the spiral is not something that exists in the universe. The spiral is something that exists in our own minds as the way our minds work, one of the patterns we have available, and we project that on things when it's the best symbol that explains the most data, okay? So the fact is that as a result of that, if you come up with a theory of the psychology of story, and you see the DNA of psychology itself, okay, at that point, then it's naturally going to be reflected in anything that is seen as being an accurate portrayal of aspects of the human psyche, whether it's the I Ching or whether it's Dianetics looking at the human's condition and seeing their part of it, you know, it's all going to have a reflection. So that's why the similarities in there, that, you know, but it was all invented without looking at that stuff. We didn't know until after the fact. So we were very pleased, personally, to find that, although disturbed from a marketing standpoint, that everybody would think was ripped off from all these things.